I'm here.
Welcome to Making Life Brighter. I'm your host, Winifred Adams, and you're listening to Making Life Brighter Radio. And we have a special return guest, actually, Mr. Benjamin Irish. And if you have not heard our previous show back in 2019, you might want to go to the archives and check that out, because Mr. Irish is back again with a precedent-setting case that he's part of here. And we like to cover these positive fighting events that are coming along. And I say fighting in a good way because we're fighting for freedom here. And right now, Benjamin Irish is a statesman, and he is also a candidate or an ambassador, has been, to the Dominican Republic under Trump. And he was a former wrestling promoter. And he is stepped into the limelight with a very special case, but he's known for fighting corruption, as he did in Florida. And he is also a Republican Party member and a anti-communist supporter. So welcome back, Benjamin Irish.
Winifred, it's nice to be on your show. Greetings and salutations from ground zero of New York City. And as a candidate for U.S. ambassador, I didn't actually become the ambassador because of corruption, which is the true pandemic. Corruption is the real pandemic. It's not the phony COVID virus. It is corruption is the true pandemic that's eating away at this country right now.
Well, Benjamin, let's jump into what it is you did in Florida, because fighting corruption seems to come naturally to you, and you seem fearless in your pursuit of giving those that don't have a voice a voice. So what is it that you've done for people there, so we can let the audience in on your previous work?
I went into Florida as a Republican in support of the goals, the missions, the concepts of President Trump, and to clean up corruption within the party and corruption that was surrounding the party. I was shocked to find and to discover just how intrinsic and how coursing corruption is in politics on both sides, Republican and Democrat, and even the independents as well. And I discovered in my time down there, bringing some of these people before the courts, exposing them for the frauds they were committing, that politics in the United States right now, unfortunately, is it's almost like a giant pay-to-play scam. And this is a very serious issue, because the politicians in our country, for the most part, and I'm talking about 95% of them, are getting into politics and looking for elected positions is simply to get money. This is something that I've seen in countries, third world countries. This is the scourge of a great number of these countries, like Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, and in Mexico had dealt with this for years and years. And I'm very dismayed to see this appear here in such a blatant sense in the United States. So,
what is it that you're actually seeing? Like, what is it that has come in front of you that has caught your attention specifically?
Well, I think number one, the thing that stands out the most is that you have to follow the money. We've spoken about that on a prior show. So my question is, and what stands out the most is, why do you have politicians that need to raise millions, 5 million, 6 million, $10 million for positions that last 3 or 4 years, that pay, $35,000, $60,000 a year? Why do they have to raise that type of money to receive that type of a position? Okay, because they are paid off by the big corporations. Okay, these politicians are hitmen for a corporate agenda at this point, and this is also fully unlawful. And I think that the solution to this lies in the courts, and it begins at a local level. And it will eventually end up kind of like a case out of North Florida right now that I'm following voraciously, which is Ted Yoho is being sued by a United States Marine veteran. And I think it's made its way up to the DC Commerce Court. It started in the Florida Small Claims Court, and it worked its way up to the DC Commerce Court. This is a case of a senator. Is he a senator or a congressman? I'm not 100% certain what Yoho is. I know he was a veterinarian, but
I don't know myself which one he is.
But he's the guy who said some less than gentlemanly words to AOC, although I can't hold him accountable for that. I probably have some rather nasty things to say to her myself, but nevertheless, he's found himself in a ton of trouble because he hired a team of investigators, United States military veterans, to go across the eastern seaboard, locate terrorist training camps run by Al Qaeda and groups like ISIS. These people found them, videotaped them, put together incredible reports. And he was supposed to use this to make propositions in Washington to shut these things down. And instead of doing that, he goes out to his dinners, his fundraisers, and says, "Look, you have to give me the money. You have to give me money to support my political agenda because I've discovered these terror camps." Did nothing for them. So that's how deep corruption runs in this country. But there is a solution, and the solution is the people. The solution is your everyday man and woman saying, "I've had enough of this. We're not going to accept corruption. Corruption is like cancer. You can't have just a little bit, because even a little cancer eventually will kill you. Okay, we'll travel and kill everything, and you can't have just a little bit of corruption. There's no acceptable level of corruption." And this is something that the United States has never been known for on this scale before. So I think that the best thing that we can do to represent our country, the best thing we can do as patriots right now, is to fight corruption in the United States and bring this country back to what it once was, which was known as a place where, for the most part, things like this, you wouldn't get away with it.
I love that. And Ted, by the way, appears to be a congressman. So just for the record. And so how do you visualize being able to come up against this beast, because it's far reaching? So how does one accomplish that county to county, state to state, party to party?
Well, the way I look at it is this: is that unfortunately a lot of things have fallen apart in the United States right now. Our schools have fallen apart, and if you take a look at what happened during COVID, we had schools closed during COVID. We couldn't get our children to school for almost a year. This is absurd. And other parts of the law enforcement has fallen apart. Cops, police officers are afraid to arrest people because they're afraid of public sentiment, and they'll be sued frivolously and superfluously for nothing. Okay, people are afraid to defend themselves in their own homes because they're afraid that they'll receive a media backlash and their life will be over, and they'll go bankrupt and get sued, even if someone breaks into their home with a weapon to kill them. So, a lot of things have fallen apart. Now, large portions of our court system have fallen apart too, but large portions are still operating. And I've said this before. I don't believe I've said it on your show, but I've said it before, which is that the Supreme Court has a very unique role in running this country, and the federal courts have a very unique role in running this country. So when you have corruption on the lower level, okay, in the state courts and the housing courts and what have you, the idea is we document that corruption, and then we bring it up to the higher court. We bring it up to the next level, because the one thing that they can't do right now, okay, they can't just strip us of our constitutional rights in federal court. So I think the federal courts are the open door, okay, to regulating this and ending this. We have to establish facts and precedent in the federal court, and that's what's going to be the nail in the coffin for corruption in this country.
I think that's a sound plan. And the fact that it's hinging on constitutional rights is part of your current plight. So let's dig into what it is that you're doing in the Bronx there. Is that correct? And the case that you've been allowed to represent for, which is sort of unprecedented, isn't it?
Yeah, I was very surprised myself, actually, that the judge let me cross the bar, so to speak, and represent this family, 3 generations of women in the New York Southern District Federal Court. Obviously, because of the circumstances surrounding the case, I'd like to omit the names of the plaintiffs and not speaking too much specific about who they are, because they are litigating against people who have shown ties to organized crime and other things, and narcotics trafficking. But yeah, I was surprised I was able to cross the bar. And this is a case of 3 generations of women, Dominican women, who were living in an apartment in the Bronx, and they had run into a court case with their landlord, overpayment. They were able to come up with the payment amounts through some of the state agencies and also on their own to pay off all the rent that was in arrears. But before they could even finish the trial, while they were waiting on another date, about 2 weeks before that date in the Bronx landlord-tenant court, the landlord and the city marshal and went into the apartment, removed all their stuff, smashed up the apartment to bits, and sent them photographs of what they did in the apartment and said, "You have to pay us this money now, or you'll never get your stuff back, your family heirlooms, your passports, your all this stuff." So this was a smash and grab. It was an eviction that I haven't heard of or seen anything like this in the Bronx in over 20 years, maybe even longer. This is an old school style mafia eviction, of people from this building. And we said, look, this is a matter for the federal court. This is about constitutional rights. Nobody has the right to take justice and due process into their own hands against you in a court, which is what they did. They did this to these people while the trial was going on. And I also want to say, and I don't mean to bloviate here, but I also want to say that I find it particularly abhorrent that you had an involvement from the state government, from the Human Resources Administration, offering to pay the entire arrears, and that the judge, Bernadette Black, in that case, didn't have the presence of mind or the understanding, or maybe she did and she just didn't want to do it, or she was colluding with these people, but she didn't have the presence of mind to accept that payment from the state. That was these women had a right to receive that. This is a non-negotiable item in
Especially during COVID. I mean, if you're trying to get these things off the docket, and this was done, and I'm going to go back to the words you just used, which was you use the word justice in there. It seems like it's anything but justice. And these people were displaced. They didn't have their items anymore, and many of their things were broken. Wouldn't it seem compassionate and caring in this type of scenario, no matter what the situation, because there are additional circumstances to this situation, which we'll get into. But the fact that the judge took the volition of making it more difficult for these people, as opposed to actually assisting, seeing a green light that could move this scenario forward in the positive. It's set back again, correct?
In my opinion, the judge is just as guilty of civil rights violations in this matter as the landlords, as the marshal, who is a state actor with a badge, as guardian ad litem who never presented in any of the three jurisdictions, because it's been through two state courts and now it's in federal court, which is what it takes sometimes to get it into federal court, and to show how some of these violations occurred, first in landlord tenant, later in the state appeals court. She never presented how she was assigned, or how she gave consent to represent this person, how this person was determined incapacitated, how the judge and her arrived at the conclusion that she needed representation. They never presented any of this. The marshal never presented paperwork, documentation, warrants, itemization of what was in the apartment. Nothing to this extent. So the judge is clearly just as guilty of constitutional rights violations against these women as all of the other actors in this. You had the state agency was willing to pay the rent for these people. This is not negotiable. The judge has no right to refuse that. Okay, because when she refuses that, that's applying a discriminatory standard to something that is your state and federal constitutional right. If the state says Winifred Adams is entitled to $7,000 from the state fund for rent arrears, and they have to accept that. Okay, so here you have a judge who says, well, you know what, I'm going to apply a different standard for Winifred, an example. I'm going to apply a different standard for this group of people as opposed to the next people who come before me 5 minutes later with the same scenario where the state says we're going to pay. This is social law, and this is part of the pandemic of corruption. But, we've exposed these people. They're before the federal court. There was a DEA investigation. There were arrests made by the DEA. Of one of the defendants was arrested during the course of this litigation for operating a narcotics lab in one of these buildings from the landlords. So we're going to get these guys, and they deserve it too, because this is just an old world, organized crime smash and grab. It's against hardworking, decent people. These people were healthcare workers. These people were seamstresses. The daughter was in her first year of college when this occurred, and had to leave school. These people were put into the freezing cold New York streets because of this. And it's just totally unacceptable.
It's tragic, really. It's tragic, as if we don't have enough going on in our world already. And the way the actual bigger picture is playing out across the world, people don't need more to contend with. And that's why I'm saying that about the judge, because it sounds like it's discrimination or appointed backdoor dealing, really, because what does the state gain from that? What does the judge gain from doing this?
This has crossed my mind many times during the course of the litigation. The only thing that I can proffer in that regard is that it's very obvious right now. And by the way, this was pre-COVID, but it's very obvious right now. In fact, it's a fact. It's a fact that a lot of these state programs are out of money.
Yes.
ERAP and these programs to help pay for people who are behind on their rent. And look, you have to look at this realistically. Okay, the landlords have to have tremendous costs involved in running these buildings. They have to pay for the oil. They have to pay for the electricity. If the people don't pay the rent, they still have to keep that up. It's totally illegal. It's unlawful, actually, to turn off the gas, to turn off the lights, to do all these things, turn off the water into somebody's apartment. It's totally illegal to do all these things. People have done it in the past, right? But so the landlord still has to eat that cost. But these state programs are completely out of money. They have no money left. So I could say, look, what does the state gain from that? They don't gain anything, but what would their underlying purpose be, the real true purpose? Probably they just need to move these things through the court. But we can't let deprivations like this slip through the cracks. I'd like to see a judge with some balls. Excuse the language. I'd like to see a judge with enough balls to criminally sanction people who behave like this in front of their courts. When you have landlords who are represented by, in this case, I think it was about 10 lawyers, accountants, and others from a criminal law firm representing them in Bronx landlord-tenant court, imputing upon a judge that you need to apply a discriminatory standard in in invoking these people's constitutional rights. And then they go into court and they say, yes, you know what, we did this, because they freely admitted it. Our client went in and smashed up the apartment and removed all their stuff. It was a misunderstanding because we thought that there was an active warrant. That's what their argument is.
That's not a misunderstanding. That's a blatant act of violence without a warrant.
It's a blatant felony in front of a court, using the court as a stalking horse participant in that activity. I'd like to see a judge with the guts to raise her hand and say, all right, I've heard enough here. Put these people in handcuffs. It's very hard to find that these days, Winifred.
Yes.
And that's what their function is.
Well, let's take another point just for a quick minute here, because you said that these programs are out of funding. We're going to go back to our previous interview back in 2019, and where we looked at how New York State especially was doing death for dollars and counting everything as an actual COVID death, when in fact, maybe it wasn't. You yourself walked to the hospitals and found no lines around the corner and all that. You witnessed that yourself. So where did all the money go that was collected?
Well, I mean, we know that what was the most recent news, that Dr. Fauci is a billionaire or something now? Is that right? Man went from having a net worth of a few $1,000,000 to now apparently he's a billionaire. So where did the money go? I can tell you how it gets distributed, and I can tell you where it's supposed to go, and I think you'll be able to see for yourself, and all your listeners will be able to understand what's happening with that money. COVID testing, the vaccines. This is a structured system. There is regulation in place that you do not have to meet the standard qualifications of a medical office or of a testing facility to issue vaccines or to perform COVID tests. But you do have to register, and you register as a laboratory on an emergency basis. You register that through the state. It is reported back to the federal government, and every COVID test that you perform, every vaccine that you give, receives a number. It is reported back through the state authority to the government. You pay a fee. I think it's every 200 that you give, you pay a fee. And at which point the federal authorities, not the government, the CDC, they're an agency, Winifred, issues a percentage of that fee back to the state health authority for their operations. Okay, so this is all about making money, and it goes around in a circle, and I look at it with the legal term as structuring. Okay, I think this is structuring of these fees and of this business. And I think the big red flag is that states are starting to ask, hey, where's all the money that we are owed in federal aid for this COVID stuff? So I think that in between that and the structuring of these fees, we can say, with a reasonable evidence standard, that money is missing. So money has been stolen. Okay, and it's time to bring felony charges against some of these people who are involved in this. But you have to start at the top. You don't want to start at the very bottom. You
Well,
have to start
what do
at
you think about the changing of guard here in New York State?
as far as the administrator, I don't call her governor, Hochul goes.
Yes.
I
How
think
do
is
you,
it, listen, yeah, Andrew Cuomo, I think it was a complete setup job. You know, it's
Mhm.
just Democrats, have decided, and they do this quite a bit. That if you don't play ball with them, that they just they want to chop your head. They want to get you out of their system, and you know, former Governor Cuomo, I think he got railroaded. I think that the evidence, of what he did not constitute what they were saying they were going to charge him with. I don't I, I don't know if he had acted improperly, and I think that the only way you could determine if he acted improperly would be at a trial. You take testimony from the witnesses, you look at the circumstances, and you review the evidence. I think that he's a victim of uh, of guilty until proven innocent. I think that he was made in the media to be guilty, and he has his rights too. And Hochul is an unelected uh, uh, governor, and I don't consider her to have the authority. Um, you know uh,
well,
that,
that's
that
interesting, Benjamin, because you as a staunch Republican and a proponent of the Republican Party take an interesting position in saying that, especially after the COVID rollout with him in charge of, taking in so many things and making the decrees that he did on.
Well, listen, I don't care who you are, or what you're accused of. You have a right in this country to innocent until proven guilty. Okay, I think you have that right. Just because somebody says something about you does not mean that it's so. I mean, people say things about me, people say things about you, but until they come up with the evidence standard to convict you in a court. I mean, you haven't seen Governor Cuomo go on trial. If Governor Cuomo had done the things that they said that he did, okay, he would have been arrested if there was evidence to prove it. He would be facing a criminal trial right now, but he's not. He's not. And anyone could sue anybody in the courts too, and that's fine. Yeah, I mean, look, I don't agree
Well,
with his politics, but at the end of the day, the Constitution applies to all of us.
let's talk about your case again. Let's go back into where this is going to go next and what you can do about that based on what you've found with the judge basically not assisting these women and the landlord potentially having housed a nefarious activity within their property. Where do you go from here?
Well, I think at the end of the day, some of these defendants will wind up facing criminal charges. As I mentioned earlier, one of these defendants had has been arrested for operating a narcotics lab within the landlord's property, and my understanding is that the landlord had made a statement uh, to the DEA that he had terminated that person from employment. He was a superintendent in the building. The man who was operating the narcotics lab, who was the super, yes, apparently he was terminated, and then the next day went back to work in the same building using a different name. And so the DEA had arrested him, and there are investigations that are active by the state and federal government against these defendants. They're going on right now. I've spoken to some of the investigators. about what has occurred. And I think that the next logical step is twofold. Number one, try our best to see to it that authorities bring criminal charges against these people, because they absolutely 100% deserve it. And they've broken the law, and these are felony crimes. And number two is that it needs to be determined, and I believe it will be determined, that the true scope and purpose of their business was not to profit from real estate enterprises, but rather to use their real estate business as a resource and a support mechanism for organized criminal activity. Do I see RICO charges coming against these people? Yes, I do. But one thing, Winifred, I'm probably sure you're aware of this, is you can also bring RICO charges. You have a private right of action to bring RICO charges. And you can even bring it against government officials. So the only thing that you need to do to violate RICO is to meet the standard that you intended to violate the act. And this far surpasses it. So that's what I see coming for these defendants.
And now, will you be able to continue to represent them or have a say in this case? And how is it that you actually got to cross the bar?
Well, you see, I'm not an attorney, but I had worked with the plaintiffs in this case to help them assemble documents and to help them invoke their constitutional rights. And I think one thing that's important for all your listeners to remember is that we are all framers of the law per the Constitution. We are all members of the judiciary, okay? And I was invoking their constitutional right to be heard in their own case in a court of law. And explained to the judge that I was familiar with the case. I was not an attorney, but that I would speak on behalf of these plaintiffs. They have informed me what they want to say to the court. And I think the judge just decided, yes, I'm going to allow it. These people have a right to be heard before my court.
Interesting. And then that very same judge didn't allow them their due after that, or
No,
the judge did. Is a different judge at this point.
Yeah, this is the federal court judge.
Okay.
This is Judge Netburn, and the prior the case Bronx landlord tenant court was Judge Bernadette Black.
Black. Okay, very good. So let's get into constitutional rights, because that is a hot button for you. So let's talk constitutional rights in terms of this very case. What is the most blinking light for you that caused you to take this on and say, I have to step in here?
It just goes back to the premise that this is the United States of America, and we have a responsibility to each other as Americans, and we have a responsibility to each other as people. Okay, if somebody's doing something bad to the person standing next to me and harming them or hurting me, I have a responsibility to grab the person doing that and say, listen, hands off my brother, hands off my sister. Stop doing what you're doing. Okay, we have a human contract between each other. Okay,
I like that. That's nice.
So that's my entire impetus for this. I saw something that was happening to three good, hardworking people who had just simply fallen on hard times. Okay, and we all fall on hard times. In this case, it was a medical reason. One of the parties said, one of the plaintiffs had broken one of her legs, and she wasn't able to go to work. And this was documented. The judge in that matter, Bernadette Black, actually made her leave the hospital that she was in recovery in, and stand before the court with this broken leg, and come into court under the threat of evicting her in an earlier hearing. And that's after there were letters presented from doctors and from the rehab unit at this hospital saying, oh, she's in rehabilitation right now. This is a very serious thing that we performed this major surgery, and they made her come into court. So it's just stuff like that that really upsets me. I really can't stand to see, human beings treating one another that way. It makes me sick, especially here in the United States. So that's my impetus.
Well, hats off to you for taking on what you have taken on to stand for people's rights and to give them the voice that they need, essentially. And in a sense, you're fearless in this. You're walking through this against perhaps organized crime, and you're taking the stance for someone else that really didn't have a voice. You're giving it a public voice as well, even in doing this here today, which is, I think, more and more necessary because our narratives seem to be twisted. And whether you believe in vaccines or don't believe in vaccines, the point is that people are getting very polarized in their narratives and we're missing out on the truth. And I think that you're taking a position of fairness with compassion in looking at the truth based on, I'll call it fact, which is constitutional rights. And I think,
Well, I got to tell you something. Winifred, I've traveled all over the world, okay, since the time I was young, and what we don't see anymore that we used to see all the time was I would go to these countries. I would go over to Paris. I would go over to Rome in Italy. I would travel to Latin America. I would, go all over the place, and people would always say, where are you from? I'm from the United States. And they go, man, I'd love to get to the United States one day because, this issue that we have here, they wouldn't tolerate that in the United States. Part of what made this country special was that it wasn't perfect, but that system worked. And what we've seen in recent times, unfortunately, is the system falling apart. And we have to work to repair that. We haven't had a presidential candidate in this country in 50 years who has rolled out or even discussed a serious education initiative. We have people in this country who have never read a book cover to cover, but we don't have leaders that value education. Okay, and it's a great friend of mine, a family member, told me recently. He said, this is about uneducated youth and unbridled corruption, and that's exactly what's going on today. So we really need to get back to that. We really need to get back to the point in this country where we are revered again for getting these things correctly when all these other places don't. America set the standard for the world, Winifred. Everything that became popular in this world, music, culture that travels all over the
That's
globe,
right.
began
That's right.
here in the United States in places like New York and Los Angeles, that's Miami, okay? Then they travel all over the world, and that's what America was known for. But now that's not the case. So what does America offer? Okay, America is supposed to be the shining city on the hill, like Reagan said. We have to say, what are we offering the rest of the world? Okay, that's also a part, in my belief, of our human contract to others. And so that's something that I see, and I just would like to remind everybody, the last time a republic fell, the last time we had a republic where citizens had a vote and liberty and freedom and rights were a real true thing was the Roman Empire. And when they lost that and they fell, it was 500 plus years before we had another republic. And I'm talking about the United States of America. So how long, if we keep losing all these things, how long is it going to be before we get them back? That's a question that corruption can't answer. That's the harbinger of corruption, because corruption cannot account for those losses. So if we keep feeding into this corrupt system, if we keep feeding into that, look, I don't take a payoff, okay? All these politicians do. I'm not a politician, but I don't take a payoff, because if we keep doing that, how are we going to make up for it? We're taking away from what's possible. We're feeding into a system that is detrimental to our children's well-being, to our grandchildren's well-being. So we have to get away from that, and we have to clean this country up.
Well, it goes back to responsibility, doesn't it? I mean, I love the point that you just made. And it does take leaders, and leaders that value education, whether it's education about our Constitution, about our rights, about, we took pride in America. My grandparents came over on the boat, but they took a lot of pride in being here, and they worked hard, and they brought new value to this land. So it drills down to responsibility at this point in my observation. And you're taking responsibility right now for those that would like to, but they don't have a voice. So perhaps just that alone is assisting, and we can assist one another when we see that there is a breach between constitutional right and action that seems like a flippant decision, such as the judge that could have given those people the leeway of what the state offered, but she didn't.
Well,
No.
I'll tell you something. I don't know if you want to go down this rabbit hole, but one thing that really it concerns me, and we saw in the state of Florida, the state courts fought this attempt. And they brought it into hearings. I don't really know where it's gone. This is just a couple of weeks old, but what you're seeing in this country right now are what are called non-for-profit legal labs. And these are non-for-profit organizations that are set up to collect funds to hire and employ lawyers to represent indigent defendants throughout these courts. So what they've done is they've taken state-operated legal aid services, and they've put that into the private sector. And there's been a resistance to this in Florida, but we need to see a resistance to this across the country. There has to be a rejection of this. I don't believe that it's constitutional. I don't believe that it fits within your due process rights, because what they're discovering is that a lot of these legal laboratories, are being funded by corporations and by other nonprofits that are residual plaintiffs in these courts. So with that theory in mind, you could have a case like you had in the Bronx with these three women, where they become defendants initially in a housing court matter, and everything's on the line for them. They're about to be evicted, and they don't have an attorney. They don't have money for an attorney. And all of a sudden the state says, here, we have this legal lab is going to provide you free representation. And it turns out that lab and that person's salary is paid for in part by the same plaintiffs who are trying to evict them. This is abhorrent.
Well, it's obviously a conflict of interest, if nothing else. It's a little bit like the lawyers that are on the board of Codex being on the board of the pharmaceutical companies, and then hoping that you get some kind of appropriate vote in favor of the people.
Being the head of the FDA.
Come on. We're smarter than this, folks, and you are leading that charge, and I applaud that. Really, this is begging a bigger question, and it really needs a full world stage. And what's happening is the world is waiting for the United States to take back that leadership role
That's a
appropriately.
great point. I agree with that 100%. That's an amazing point. The world is waiting to see how we correct this mess. I agree with you on that one.
Well, people like you are standing up to show the world, and hopefully show in many shows all of us that are working together out there to bring truthful reporting to the surface and say, look at, if we're going to have a compassionate, loving world of responsibility, we need to perhaps educate ourselves, just as you are sharing with us today, and become aware of what's happening out there. Because when it gets swept under the rug and you don't know, now you can plead the fifth and go into denial. The problem is, like you said, when there's one decision that's made, the repercussions of that over many years are hard to correct. So before we get to that point, how do we come to a place where we are responsibly taking action as opposed to making up action after the fact while everyone points the finger and blame? So taking responsibility, I want you to speak to that point, please. What does responsibility look like to you?
That there's nothing wrong with correcting an error. The real crime lies in sweeping the error under the rug and pretending that it doesn't exist.
Love that.
There's nothing wrong with correcting an error. And when you see an error, you stand up and say, listen, this is not correct. This was not right. You're involved in it. Let's take responsibility for it and make it better. I yearn for the day when we have another leader that has a sign on his desk that says, the buck stops here. Personal responsibility is, look, years ago, I would tell people, and work with people, I say, listen, this isn't a complicated job. If you make a mistake, I don't want to use a term on your show, but you raise your hand and say, I effed up. I did this wrong. This is my fault. And you know what? That's the most important thing. And now we know what happened. Now we know what the situation is. I guess another way, you say, now you know where the cancer is, so we can go take it out. And that's what we need to do. There's nothing wrong with correcting an error. The true crime is in pretending the error doesn't exist.
Well, isn't it true that in the day, your family, your neighborhood would take responsibility along with you, or your family member? Let's say somebody made a mistake. Well, you were subject to your family at that point, and many people aren't subject to their own family anymore. We're divided, we're separated from one another in a way where the family unit, maybe it's coming back together under COVID, but the family unit as a whole is losing its value, and therefore responsibility even to oneself and family has become less valued over time. Now we don't have that. We don't have the same structure. Look at up here, churches are closing all over the place. How does that work? Now the places that people would go to for sanctuary are no longer available to them, and they're condensing. So there's a change, there's a flux happening, but where do we come back together to be responsible?
I'm just curious though, in upstate New York, why are they closing? Is it a financial issue, or are they being closed by regulation?
It seems to be both, actually, apparently.
We have the separation of church and state, and it seems as if that didn't apply during COVID. I couldn't believe some of what I was seeing by these truly evil bureaucrats here in New York and in Florida as well. They were closing churches and synagogues, but they were not closing mosques. I couldn't believe that. That was I never thought I would see such a disparity in this country.
Well, a prejudice, really. And the irony is what kind of prejudice that was, given the narrative all the time of this war on terrorism. Hello?
Yeah.
It's I think you're the kind of man that is proud as a New Yorker and would walk the street carrying your pride of being not only an American, but a New Yorker. And being a New Yorker is accepting many different peoples from all over the world, accepting those differences and bringing something flavorful to the city based on who you be. Now we have this political framework that is so polarized, we don't have an opportunity to be within our pride where we are, if you will. We're being stripped of that pride. And so if these people that you defended really could speak their truth, I bet they'd have something to say about what it felt like that someone came in without a warrant and ruined all their things and then threw them on the street. Where is that being accepting of your fellow man? Where is that, bridging that gap? That's just blatant dissolution.
It's not just a crime against those three women, it's a crime against all of us.
Correct.
As residents of the state of New York, as citizens of the United States of America. And America has this duty. And one thing that's very stark about this case that really I see as being an underlying element of this case, okay, is that they tried this against people, against a family that had settled here, that came from another country. And I want to remind everybody, of this, right? When people work hard, they do the right thing, and they come to this country legally, and they arrive here, and they don't break the law, and they constantly act within the law and residually act within the law. We have a right to those people, to represent those people, to stand up for those people, just as we would anybody else. Okay, this is something that bothers me, which is that it seems as if these elements look at people who are less fortunate, who have less of an education and experience here, as an opportunity, to commit these criminal acts of deception against. So that's something that bothers me too. That's an element of this. And you have to remember, Winifred, this is a country that was built on immigrants. This is a country
That's
that was
right.
built on people who came here from other places. That's important. So if you can say, yes, I was born in this country, I'm from this country. People ask me, they go, where are you from? I go, I'm from the United States. They go, no, but where's your family from? Well, you asked me where I'm from. I'm from
Yeah.
the United States. Okay, and that's the thing, is we have this it's built in. We Americans, a lot of Americans look at this country as, okay, this is just a place you come to make money and go back to where you're from. Or we can
No, this is the land of the free and the proud. We've come a long way here to establish this, even though we're still young, right? We're young, but we were the ones that held the torch for what could be. It's the possibility, right?
Yes, it is, and that's the image, and that's the image that we need to repair, because people are looking at this country right now and going, my gosh, you have the most, the beacon, the shining light of civilization, the shining city on the hill, and they can't even get their children to school.
Well, Benjamin Irish, I appreciate you coming today. I'd love to have you back on the show with Sergeant William Cotel, who's done an amazing filing about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And I'd like to have you both back, if you don't mind. It would be
My
important.
pleasure.
Thank you so much for sharing what you're doing with us and returning. If anyone wants to look this up, you can go to the usareformer.com online, and you'll see what he's been doing there. The quote is, federal judge lets Irish crossbar to represent eviction victims. So federal judge lets Irish crossbar to represent eviction victims. Look that up. Do your homework.
Hey, Winifred, if you don't mind,
Yes.
I'd just like to encourage everyone who's listening to your radio show, especially during these times with this crazy pandemic nonsense. I want to encourage everybody to go out there and to donate, 20, 50, 100 pounds of food to their local animal shelter, to give our four-legged friends a little help in this time of need. There's a lot of pets across this country that have been abandoned, and they're definitely in need. So if anybody out there is listening, you got an extra 20 or 50 pounds of animal food lying around, please bring it to your local animal shelter and give our four-legged friends a helping hand.
That is so sweet. We are all about animals here at Making Life Brighter, and we've had lots of pet people on. This is great. So Benjamin Irish, everyone, he is making someone's life brighter. Now it's up to you to go out and make someone's life brighter as well. Thank you for being here, Benjamin. We'll see you again very soon so we can have that conversation. Hats off to you for your courage.
Thank you, Winifred.
Very good. Go jolly, everybody. We'll talk to you again soon, right here on Making Life Brighter. Like, share, and stay tuned. We'll be back soon.